one of the things that really intrigues me about the Middle East is the Arab countries that are trying to do the right thing. Yes, we have certainly faced serious dangers, and we see the tyrants, in Syria, for example, and we've seen Saddam Hussein be a serious threat. But there are Arab leaders that are trying to do the right thing. They are trying to maintain a moderate, peaceful government. They're trying to have peace with their neighbors. They're trying to work with the United States and NATO and other organizations and alliances to fend off the radicals, to keep them at bay, and to advance a different form of Islam. Now, I'm an evangelical Christian, so obviously, I don't agree with Islam, but I also have written in Inside the Revolution, for example, that there are different types of Muslims. It's very important that we understand that there are radicals who read the Quran and the other Islamic writings that are ancient, and they are mobilized to jihad, to violent war, holy war, they call it, against Jews, Christians, atheists, and against Muslims who don't agree with their vision of Islam. That's the radicals, the jihadists. But there are what I call reformers. And what's fascinating is to watch the people that are in the region who are saying, yeah, we believe in Islam, but we don't believe in cutting people's heads off. We don't believe in crucifying Christians. We don't believe in slaughtering every Muslim that doesn't agree with our view. And one of the most prominent Arab moderate leaders is King Hussein's son, King Abdullah II. Okay? King Hussein himself was an impressive reformer who not only fended off radicals who tried to overthrow him numerous times, but formed a strong alliance with the British and later with the Americans. His father, actually his grandfather rather, King Abdullah I, was assassinated on the Temple Mount right in front of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the 1950s while then Prince Hussein was standing at his side. So he saw, and this was from a radical Muslim terrorist who assassinated his grandfather. His father had health problems and so briefly rose to power, but then just was not able to fulfill the duties of the kingdom. And so this young prince, I think at the age of 17, Prince Hussein became King Hussein. And for more than 40 years, maintained stability, fought off radicals, and tried to build a moderate government. Now, I'm not saying he did everything perfect, but he was an interesting leader. And eventually, in 1994, he made peace with Israel. Extraordinary. Especially since the family, the Hashemite family of the Hashemite kingdom, consider themselves descendants, direct descendants of whom they call the prophet Muhammad. So it's interesting for a person of that background and an interesting story to make peace with Israel. Now his son came to power, King Abdullah II, in 1999 when King Hussein passed away. And he has continued in his father's tradition of trying to modernize and moderate the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan to be an island of stability and quiet and calm in the region. Now, my question going into this book was, what happens if something happens to King Abdullah and his kingdom? Jordan is not a country that most Americans think much about, honestly. I've been there numerous times. I love this country. I have many Jordanian friends. I've crisscrossed the country from the north to the south. And I find it intriguing. But most Americans, it's just not on their radar screen. Fair enough. Why is it important? Why is Jordan important to Americans and to the rest of the world? One of the reasons is because it's the cornerstone of any type of security architecture in what I call the epicenter. Meaning, if Israel and the Palestinians are going to have a lasting, comprehensive peace treaty, it's entirely premised on the concept that Jordan is a stable, bookend to the deal. So every peace deal that's being discussed, and have been for decades, is entirely based on the idea that Jordan will be secure and stable. The question is, in the environment of the Arab Spring and in the environment of radical Islamic jihadists trying to take out any government that isn't radical enough, what happens if a radical Islamic movement tries to overthrow the Kingdom of Jordan? I began to realize that King Abdullah would have to be very high on the list of targets for these radical Islamic jihadists. And I thought, what if everyone in the West, in America, in the press, in Washington was so focused on striking a peace deal with Israel and the Palestinians that they lost track of the other side of that corridor and the security of Jordan. So to do that, I began a meeting with all kinds of leaders, and the question I had was, who might try to overthrow the king of Jordan? Now, I don't want it to happen. Let me be clear about that. I am intrigued with King Abdullah and what he's done. I love the nation of Jordan. I believe there's a biblical plan and purpose for the nation of Jordan, and we can talk and write about that, in the course of this book tour. But what I did want to say was that I'm intrigued with Jordan, and I don't want this king to fall, and I don't want the kingdom to fall. I want it to be secure because it's been so friendly to Christians, to Muslims, and to Jews. And you don't find that much in the modern Middle East. But what if? Right? I'm a thriller writer. I'm not a politician. I'm a failed political consultant. So as a Middle East analyst and as a novelist, my question is, what if? And so what I began to do is go to U.S. officials and Israeli officials and others and ask them, what if somebody tries to overthrow King Abdullah and destabilize this corridor? Who are some of the suspects that might try to do that? And what I kept hearing was ISIS, this would-be Islamic State, these radical jihadists that have sort of morphed from Al-Qaeda in Iraq, then got thrown out of Al-Qaeda, and now have gone on this genocidal rampage through Syria and Iraq. So I was about halfway done with the manuscript when, and pretty set on, this book was in motion. It was going to be done soon. Actually, I was more than halfway done. But I contacted the ambassador from Jordan to the United States, and I asked if I could come meet with her. And she was very gracious. And I sat down with her and one of her colleagues, and I said, okay, here's the thing. I'm writing this novel, and it's about a possible overthrow of the king of Jordan. Now, I know that that's not exactly what you want to hear. I understand that. But here's a little bit of my background. Here's what I write about, and here's why. And I don't want this king to fall, but I think people need to understand, why is Jordan important? Where do they fit into the intriguing but strange puzzle of the Middle East? And what happens if we wake up one morning and your country's under siege? That will matter to Americans then. And though it may not seem to matter now, we need to think about it. And I think a novel would allow people to think about it in a way that writing a nonfiction book about it might not be helpful, or people might not pick it up, except unless you're an expert, which you'd already know the story. So all that to say, I said, I'd like to come and meet with the king, and I'd like to meet with your top officials, and I'd like to get your perspectives. I can fully understand why you wouldn't participate, but there's a possibility this book will wind up on the New York Times bestseller list, and I don't know how many books wind up on the New York Times list that deal with your country. And I think, for me, the best case scenario is to hear it directly from you, the good, the bad, the ugly, kind of what is your nation's perspective. And if I could hear it directly from your leaders, that would be ideal. But the book's already in motion, and I'm going to write it, but I'd love your help. And she graciously sent my request on to Amman, the capital of Jordan. And the next thing I knew, I was flying into Amman, spent several days there in May of 2014, and they really opened up the palace gates in that sense. Now, I wasn't able to meet with the king. He had a very full schedule in those days, but I sat down and had in-depth conversations with the prime minister, with the foreign minister, with the interior minister, who's responsible for the security of the country, with one of the princes, who's a close advisor, a senior advisor to the king, and several other officials. And it was just so interesting to sit there and in all these individual meetings, be able to ask them these questions and say, this is the type of stuff I'm working on, and try to understand their perspective. I don't know how they will react to the book. I understand that they don't even want to contemplate, and who would want to contemplate the possible massive attack of an Islamic radical group on your country, especially when you're an Arab Muslim country. But I'm grateful that they were willing to spend time with me. I think the book is richer and more textured and nuanced because of it. And my prayer, I told them then, I've written about it since, I've written about it before. I am praying every day for the King of Jordan and for his government and for his people. And I believe that Christians are safe in that country, generally speaking, historically speaking, in the modern era. And I think we need to understand the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and care about what happens there, because the domino effect of it falling into the hands of ISIS or some other radical Islamic group would have a huge and horrible effect on the Palestinians, on Israel, and the United States, and on the global economy. And that's why I think it's important, and that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, The Third Target.